So the last section, I think we basically were intending to come back and just say, get some perspectives from everyone around the table. And we just thought of some topics of discussion here. We have covered quite a few of them already, but always we can pop back to these questions and cover some of these or anything else that comes to you.
So is like LTE, is it a make before break type of roam with a device? So do we get a very graceful roam between these access points or eNode Bs?
Yeah, it's like the term they use is seamless handover. So again, if you are connected, like if you are in a data exchange mode, that transition is very seamless. A lot of work that has gone into these standards and the enhancements over the years is making it very seamless,
So
really.
just like it does on a traditional LTE.
Exactly.
I mean, that
Absolutely.
adds to the use cases.
And I will claim it's even better because many times it will be local. You'll be moving from one AP to another AP, which are on the same LAN.
Yeah, right.
Versus like a macro-cellular network, base stations talking to some EPC somewhere, and signal is getting routed from there, right?
But the benefit here, though, is it's driven by the infrastructure.
That is
right?
exactly
Absolutely.
right. That's exactly
The
right.
clients are doing what they're told as
Exactly.
opposed to being
Exactly.
idiots.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yes.
And quite honestly, it is that one characteristic is driving a whole category of use cases.
Yeah, that's
Absolutely.
Anything that's mobile at few tens miles of hour inside a warehouse, as an example, this is an automatic candidate for something like that.
Yeah. So just to simplify all of that, I would say this has everything that the LTE technology brings, plus you can do additional things because you're in a very well-controlled environment.
Yeah.
Right?
So are you guys envisioning that John Boggs' company goes and installs it himself, purchases and installs it and manages it himself, or or it's more going to be through VARs and managed service providers?
I think inevitably through partners, inevitably. I think wireless of any form, I don't think is going to reach that anytime soon. So I expect our expectation will be almost exclusively through partners.
And a lot of that goes back to that license that you talked about earlier that the installer has to have.
That's
right?
Exactly.
So,
Exactly
so
right.
there's
Some certification is
right,
needed.
exactly.
Exactly.
Do you have any insight into that process? Is that a cumbersome process?
Certification process?
Yeah.
It's a
For the
very
installer.
lightweight process. It's 4-hour online course. At the end of it, you electronically get a certificate.
It only costs $50,000.
No, it costs, I think Federated, Google, both of them offer it.
Federated
No,
is
one of the SaaS companies, yeah.
no, Federated you have to pay, but Google is free.
That's right. But even the Federated fee is not to the extent of that.
No, it's like under $1,000.
Yeah.
I just looked it up. Sorry.
Perfect.
What is the operational characteristics of this? So if I'm going in, we're all familiar around the room with doing RF designs for Wi-Fi. When I go in, am I looking primarily at capacity every time, and I just simply follow the old, single channel company of putting up APs everywhere?
Yep, draw a circle, go,
Yeah.
right?
Red Celona
Yeah, right. So,
design.
Because I have a customer that is very interested in this. They're a utility company, and they are looking at deploying this for possible backhaul for customer networks and all endpoints. So, one of the things they've come to me to ask about is how do we go about designing this network?
Yeah. You want to take it?
Yeah. I mean, the design and the requirements is really well understood in terms of what kind of capacity performance you get. And then it's really a matter of understanding the use case, like is it a capacity or coverage kind of use case. If it's a capacity-driven use case, then how it translates into a design is very well understood, I would say, because of this ecosystem has been around for some time. And going back to removing the friction point, this is something we are also working on. I don't know if you get an opportunity, we may be able to show you some of the things that we do there to really simplify it in terms of giving the coverage area requirement, what applications you need, and give you a simple recipe.
Okay.
When we show the demo, I would love to show that to you.
Yeah. I think just maybe think of it, I as coming from the Wi-Fi background, he hates it when I do this, but I do this all the time to him. I think of network design in the LTE world it's lesser constraint on maybe the channels being apart and so on. And so you're able to do more with fewer channels. But that is still a good characteristic to have. So you get to do it as much as you can. And then the only difference is obviously your propagation model, the range is higher and all of those things. So you can still apply somewhat of that to get a layman's view of what that could look like. And then the more proper design is something that, as he said, we're trying to build a tool set so that we can do real designs.
Because I think that's, me personally, that's the struggle I've had with trying to understand CBRS is trying to draw those parallels between the Wi-Fi world and the cellular world that obviously I'm unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
So.
And I think that's one of the things that we are for sure going to focus a lot on, just to provide the tool set for people coming from that world.
I was just thinking, who's your target reseller? You rolled a whole bunch of times. You mentioned, we do this all the time. You do it all the time in the cellular world. So are cellular installers doing this, or are you expecting people who've installed Wi-Fi to now move into this? They need different tools, different experiences along the way, and you need to kind of tie those together. Now, if you're going to be going to the people who've been installing cell towers, then they might already know how to do it. So I think we need to know, and that's actually a question, who is your reseller channel? Who are you going after? The Presidios, the individual mom and pops, the SMB installers, the people who sell Ubiquity? Where's this?
Yeah. So I think our very strong belief is that the current Wi-Fi channel does need to get educated, learn this, and therefore can be able to do this. Without that, the market does not exist, period. So that is our strong belief. We are also aware that we have to do education and provide tools to get to that stage. Think of this as literally step 0 of that. So we are absolutely of that belief. We are now looking a little bit to the market to tell us which verticals, what segments, high end, mid end, low end. And that's feedback that we're quite honestly looking from all of you as well to see where is the demand coming from so we are able to help more appropriately.
It's way more difficult for cellular people to design Wi-Fi networks than Wi-Fi people to design cellular networks, at least at the RAN layer, right? The RF technology is different and less concerning.
They're sensitive maybe to the design choices and so forth, right? There's absolutely a very good point.
I think that's a telling perspective, because I think there's this natural conversation where we want to bridge the gap between 5G and enterprise Wi-Fi, and that it's hard to go from the 5G world into the Wi-Fi world, but it's likely going to be less resistance going the other way.
Absolutely, very good point.
If you decide to go the other way, instead of reinventing the wheel, you could integrate with current solutions such as Ekahau.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we will absolutely love to do that. I mean, again, we're a young company. We would love to. We would absolutely.
IB Wave already does a lot of cellular.
IB Wave
does
do this.
IB Wave does
Be the solution too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm just thinking about this from a VAR perspective, because I mean, that's kind of the viewpoint I look at. I mean, I see things like large healthcare campuses being able to utilize this, large EDUs, for instance, that cover large square. Factories, manufacturing, possibly. I mean, I don't know that I necessarily would try to target those first, but I mean, that's kind of where I see it playing at. It's you drew a good point when you were talking about the Verizon thing with Mandalay Bay and all, and that's kind of where I see that fitting in initially. I think trying to pitch this to your smaller shops that maybe if we were drawing a Wi-Fi comparison, like say 50 APs or something like that, I don't know that they would benefit from it.
That's a fair point. It's great feedback.
So maybe to go along with that thought process, the thing that we have with Wi-Fi is every year millions of access points are sold. And what that has done is driven down the cost of the tools and driven down the cost of the hardware. And it's a known, it's kind of a known value for companies. They know they need Wi-Fi. They know what they can generally expect from Wi-Fi, and they generally know what the cost of Wi-Fi is going to be. Where does this kind of sit in that? Obviously, I'm not asking for pricing, but if we look at it from a maybe cost per square foot or something along those lines, where does that sit with Wi-Fi currently, and where do you see that going in the future?
Yeah, so in my past role at Federated, because we were evangelizing CBRS, we did a couple of quite open TCO kind of comparisons. And I think what we inevitably found was, if you think about it, just coverage, because it always goes to coverage versus capacity, that always changes things. If you look at it purely from a coverage perspective, it's almost equal, barely any difference. When you bring in capacity, if you want to get absolutely equal capacity, usually this tends to be, I'm giving you very rough estimates, around 20 to 30% more expensive overall, everything included. This is, I'm saying, the equivalent of management, whatever is the equivalent of an EPCs, spectrum, all of that stuff. So that's approximately swag range today.
Okay.
We think that this is going to change as volume grows, obviously, and it'll actually end up being very similar to Wi-Fi.
Yeah, and maybe one thing to highlight is capacity in bits per second is one metric, but then when you bring the quality of service and the business outcome and so forth, sometimes those equations change as well, because you may need to over-provision Wi-Fi to get certain kind of guaranteed performance versus
Roaming is a great example of that,
It
right?
is, yeah. It is.
That's one of those things where I feel like this is probably has the potential to displace Wi-Fi in those high roam environments or even high speed motion environments, things along those lines. If the cost is comparable.
I know we are in company of experts, but did we have a chance to compare Wi-Fi and LTE and basically go over the battery use, security, mobility, all the important components that would justify that 20% difference?
My honest opinion, I think technically some of those are true and false, and you can have many opinions. But my honest opinion is Wi-Fi is here in most enterprises and will continue to evolve. So I think that from a TCO perspective, the question usually in our conversations with customers, here is a new thing I'm rolling out, whether it's an AGV that needs mobility or new cameras that need a guaranteed performance or push-to-talk that needs performance. And it is actually going to help my Wi-Fi performance in general. So, we don't believe, at least at this stage for sure, this is in any ways a competitive thing.
Yeah, it's not an or.
This is a completely an and therefore that comparison in most real enterprise scenarios, we don't think it changes anything.
Well, on that topic, Wi-Fi is still your network. You are on your network when
Absolutely.
you're on Wi-Fi. When you're on this, you're not on your network unless you VPN back in, and that has all kinds of implications.
So, sorry, this is completely the same as a Wi-Fi in that sense. It's a completely private network.
You own your desktop.
Okay, all right, we're back to the private side. Strike that one.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, two more questions. Last two, sorry. Yes.
This point has been discussed earlier, and I've discussed that. I've talked about that with previous presenter. I'm from Canada. Hayden is from Australia.
That's the same question I was going to ask.
Yeah. So CBRS is pushed a lot on the U.S. side, but a tremendous part of your potential client base is based outside of the U.S., where CBRS is just not available.
I agree. So I think it goes back to some of the spectrum-related questions we were saying. We do need spectrum options in those places. From a product architecture, if I split this up, we have been very careful that everything we built on the software layer above the radio is completely agnostic to that. So we absolutely have that belief too that there's a huge opportunity in every country, but we will address them as and when spectrum models suited to these type of use show up. And I think Australia is already doing a lot in places like mining and so on that we have heard of consistently. So,
Yeah, and maybe, and then the spectrum models, sometimes what we see is some operators can lease some of their spectrum for some of those use cases, as long as you have a solution that can be leveraged in those places where they don't use their spectrum, right, in more rural areas and so forth. We see some of that happening.
You better have very deep pockets for them to lend you any.
Good point.
I'm trying to kind of touch on some of the topics up here you've got mentioned. From my perspective, I see this being used as a mission critical like VoIP network. That offloading that from Wi-Fi, putting that on the dedicated spectrum that we know will always be there. As far as the message on 5G and how operators are, perception amongst enterprise IT, I think there's still a lot of unknowns because, like, I mean, we even have a lot of questions about what we're actually talking about here. Those questions abound even more when you get into the enterprise IT world. And because of that, right now, what enterprise IT is seeing are companies like Verizon beating on the door and saying, hey, we want to put CBRS in your network. And they see it more as an attack on your spectrum and space and stuff like that than they do as something that could perceivedly help them because they don't understand the difference between PAL and GAA and all of that.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Maybe one.
Yeah, I wanted to throw in there, kind of piggybacking Scott down there, but maybe arguing a point a little bit is that, you know, I would see a lot of the two use cases. So if you look from a business perspective, who has the pain points? And who has a low barrier to entry in that they own the infrastructure and they own the clients, right? Because like large public venue, you can't really control that. And definitely healthcare and manufacturing. So I think you said not manufacturing, but I think that's a huge pain point for them. And they're definitely.
I said maybe manufacturing.
Right. So I think that's a huge pain point, and they have a pain point and they have a budget for that. And if you're talking about, you know, I know you said this is really rough, but 20 to 30, even 50 or 60% more cost than a traditional wireless system as an overlay is absolutely something they would jump right on.
That's great feedback.
Yeah, I've thought back to my manufacturing days where I worked, I've done a lot of work in manufacturing. And the AGVs that you mentioned, you know, there's a lot of use cases where I've fought through some network designs and really struggled to provide. I was able to provide a perfectly capable network, but the AGVs didn't roam well. You know, there were things along those lines. If that could go away, yeah.
And the healthcare, I think there's two pieces. So the roaming, because they have the nurse paging systems, that's definitely a pain point with wireless, as you guys already know.
Huge.
But also the monitoring devices, because, you know, we had that divergence and then the convergence with, you know, we had separate spectrum for that traditionally, and then we, you know, merged over to, and now they're kind of going, maybe that's not the right thing, and they're looking for something to go back to.
Great feedback. It's great feedback.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much. This was a fantastic session. We'll follow up with everybody offline as well. For those who are available and interested, we would love to show you a sneak peek of the early version of the product the way it is today. Talk to you more.
Thank you.